This Tuesday, experts believe the introduction of a new basic income grant will not deter people from looking for jobs. A panel was tasked with determining whether this grant can benefit vulnerable groups. It's expected to now hand over its report to the Department of Social Development later today. But for more on what we can expect in this report, we're joined by the panel's chairperson, Professor Alex van den Heever, joins us via our video link this morning. Prof, great to see you. Thanks very much for coming on so early on a Tuesday. Before we get into the nitty-gritty that's contained in the report, I just want to clarify. You and I spoke earlier this year about the formation of this panel, looking into how viable a basic income grant is. How is the findings of that will be released today different from that discussion we had earlier in February?
Well, this report and this analysis isn't looking at a basic income grant. It's looking essentially at analyzing the economic and social impacts of the COVID social relief of distress grant. So the grant that's currently in place.
I see.
And it's really attempting to examine both the sort of the social effects as well as the economic and fiscal effects of it to see whether such a grant or a grant very similar to it will result in any instability from an economic perspective, and whether and what version of it might be problematic. So there are a number of issues that were examined to kind of test viability and options.
Yeah, but I mean it's all sort of part of the discussion leading us to that basic income grant issue, right?
Well, it's all part of what is essentially a basic income, a system of basic income support, because the child support grant, the old age pension, the disability grants, all form part of a system of income protection for people and families who are in difficulties and will always be in any society. So really what's being examined here is a viable system of underlying sort of ambient income support that is permanently in place to protect people from, essentially from inadequate incomes during their working careers. And that is basically the system is part of building an overriding system of income support, which must include at the end of the day adults of sort of working adults, and they have been a big gap up until now.
I mean, the COVID-19 grant, Prof, little as it was at 350 Rand, what did you find insofar as the kind of support we were able to give so many South Africans at that time?
Well, it's had on the modelling analysis, it shows that there are very significant impacts on poverty as well as on inequality, and that the economic impacts are positive, and there is also very, very significant, there are big differences between provinces in terms of impacts, because Gauteng and the Western Cape are very urban provinces and have, where most of the income is earned. Essentially, those are the biggest sort of economic focal points of the country. But the income support tends to support people in the more rural provinces as well very extensively. So even though it's small and should be higher, it was still very, very important in terms of impact.
Prof, on the one hand, in response to the issue of the basic income grant, what government has always said, the finance minister very recently also said that we just don't have the money to implement a basic income grant. But then, ironically, research does show, and it's part of the information that you've given us as well, in countries where there is this comprehensive social security support, ironically, unemployment is not as high as what we see in South Africa.
Yeah, there is absolutely no evidence that such a grant drives unemployment or creates a negative incentive for employment. Certainly not at the levels at which it's being paid. If you were giving people R1 million a month, you will create a disincentive to work. That's what tends to happen at the upper end of the income spectrum, where we are perfectly happy with people getting lots and lots of money without having to earn it. But at the bottom end, this is basically just protecting one's viability, one's ability to sort of access society, to even search for jobs. And there are many, many things that a household can use some basic income for. It's really up to them to decide what they would do next. But building this up is very important. But it's also important to note that there's no economy in the world that doesn't substantially redistribute income. And basically, this isn't about saying government finances are constrained. This is, at the end of the day, a redistributive scheme. There is a shift of a movement of income from the highest income groups to the lowest income groups in South Africa. And so it's really creating a structure for that to occur. It's basically balancing out unevenness in the allocation and distribution of income that tends to happen naturally in a market economy. You have to balance it out. And we in South Africa have not been doing that forever. And as a consequence, we actually skew the development of communities, households, etc., and the country and the economy, because we actually concentrate our incomes in the very top end.
Yeah.
But even Sweden, the United States, the United Kingdom, they redistribute their income as well to create a fairer distribution. You have to do it, and this is one of those structures that achieves an element of it.
You're talking about 90% of the wealth being in the hands of 10% of the population.
Yeah, it's actually a far smaller percentage that has the 90% of wealth in South Africa. That's the wealth, and the income is also extremely skewed. And most of the income in the top decile is actually skewed toward the top half of the top decile, and it gets worse from there. So it's actually extremely skewed in South Africa, and in fact it's a market failure. But it's a predictable market failure. We do know about it, and you have to balance it out in the way in which you structure in particular your social security systems to ensure that there is a more even balance. And what it does mean is that a part of the income that is distributed in any society is delinked from work in order to make sure that this balance occurs, because you can't attach all distribution of income to earnings from work.
Right. Are we talking essentially about increasing tax revenue?
Well, not for the COVID SRD grant. I mean, the SRD grant level is effectively already financed in government. But the way in which we've done the economic modeling is to assume a zero-sum, zero-based financing regime, and to look at it as a kind of a cost-benefit analysis. And if one were to introduce a grant 10 times its size, you would have to introduce taxes. And there's always a risk that if you shock the economy and shock the tax system, that there will be negative behavioral effects. So to the extent that you need to look at much larger amounts over time, it's been the recommendation from last year, and it remains the same this year, that one should approach that incrementally to avoid shocks to the tax system and to rather grow the system incrementally. So you don't have to introduce massive new taxes to finance things. But yeah, if you wanted to go for a sort of a 400 billion rand grant, then you're going to have to do that. And that does come with risks. So although it's redistributive and although you may have positive effects, the risk of doing it too quickly in that way is that people start to react to the very high tax rates. So you don't have to do that. But what we've looked at and examined in this analysis is which tax regime would be better. Do you use personal income tax or VAT as your underlying method of raising revenue to finance a grant like this, even though it's largely financed as it is now? And that's where we do show that there are big risks to increasing VAT to finance redistributive schemes. That appears to have a negative economic effect as well as a distributive effect. So I think that at this point in time, there isn't a particular need to raise taxes to finance the COVID SRD grant as it currently stands. Yeah.
So the expert panel report, a different one this time, Prof, being launched on the basic income support, and that's taking place at 9:30 this morning. You're the chairperson of that panel, and we hope to get you back on the program to discuss the findings of that report a bit further. Prof van der Heever, thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for joining us once again for talking about this incredibly important issue.